Good Sunday afternoon. I hope everyone's doing good. And wow, we definitely have the world in a place of shifting. And again, this has all been going on very strongly, well, ever since 220, but definitely since this February, because we had that Saturn Neptune conjunction. So clearly a time where things are really, really shifting in this world. And of course, what my thumbnail was today is what's going to happen with the Middle East. Well, I've been looking at some interrogations, and I can tell you that clearly things are probably in a state of change like they never, ever have been. And I mean probably for the last 100 years. I always mention Woodrow Wilson, who was really the guy who signed in the Federal Reserve Act. And of course, you can see there's the wife there. You better sign this or they'll kill the grandkids too. But anyhow, what's interesting is, all kidding aside, probably not false, but it was a very mysterious thing there what happened. Everybody's heard about the Titanic, Woodrow Wilson signing the Federal Reserve Act. But really what happened is we got the central bankers in. And now, why am I talking about this when, we're focused on the Middle East here today? Well, I did some research, and I thought this was kind of fun research. Everybody's heard of Lawrence of Arabia. Remember? Amazing movie. And I always loved the cinematography in that movie. Lawrence of Arabia was probably one of the most cinematically amazing movies ever to be produced, next to Gone with the Wind and a few others. But what's interesting is, forget the movie. Let's really focus on what did it represent. Well, I've talked a lot about the banking powers, the central bankers that have been at the very top of the pyramid in power. And this is interesting because why am I bringing this up with astrology? Well, it all interrelates. Ever since World War I, the lines on the map got redrawn. And what's interesting is Iran is literally what I would call the old world of Persia. And Persia was around for thousands of years. There was no, Syria and Iraq and all these other countries, UAE and all these Saudi Arabia. It was just Palestine, Egypt, and the Holy Land. In fact, this is talked about a lot in many ancient texts. Well, what's interesting is actually the dynasty, they said, ruled by Iran prior to World War I was the Safavids. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but that was basically from 1501 to 1736. And then the Qajars came in the 1780s up until 1925. And what's interesting is, where am I going with all this? Well, the Strait of Hormuz has a lot more effect here than just Iran. When you look at, in fact, I'm going to share the screen here and go to that because it's kind of interesting how we can see this. Now, let me get my screen here to share. And one of the things that we see is Trump has just issued an ultimatum, 48 hours. He's saying, you better get the strait open within 48 hours or we're going to start taking out power plants. Well, if we come over here, you can see here's the Middle East, right? And if I zoom in here, we can see, and in fact, if you look how close the proximity is, here's again Israel, Syria, here's Turkey. This was the old passageway down into the Holy Land, these areas right here. So it was the only way in. And I always talk about this book called the Book of Abramelech, which was really about a journey from a man called Rabbi Maharil, who went down to pursue the holy magic. Well, not to get too far off track on that one, the Strait of Hormuz, there's been some interesting things that I've been hearing from people, like it's 33 miles away, or wide. And there's also, 33 is a Masonic number, that is a master number. So there's a lot of correlations here, I will say that. But this is a very, very narrow strait. You can see this here, that they're cramming all this oil through. Well, if we come back out here a little bit, you'll see where is Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia, all positioned here. I'll just zoom in just a little bit better here so you can see a broader brushstroke. Look at here. Here's Iraq. Notice in 2003, we went and acquired that oil. Here's Kuwait right here. And of course, this is all Saudi Arabia down here. So the massive amounts of oil that flow through here are actually not dependent on the United States. And here, I'm going to put up another graph that's really quite interesting, and you'll see where I'm going with all this. This graph right here, now you may have to zoom in a little bit, but it's a really, really good graph that talks about who produces the most oil in the world. This is like by country. Guess who's number one? The United States. The United States is supposedly producing 13.5 million barrels a day. That's a lot of oil. And the next is Russia with 9.87. You can see down here, Saudi Arabia is at 9.51. Canada's way down the line here at 4.94. And then, of course, Iraq is down here at 4.39. China is almost hardly anything. That's why they import most of their oil. And then look, as you go down the line, it descends down to who's producing the least amount of oil. So when we look at this, it's like, wow, the United States, why is our fuel prices up? You know, between $1 and $2 a gallon. Of course, in California, it's over $2 a gallon. But why is it up so high? Well, this, as I mentioned a couple of podcasts ago, I think is so much bigger than just oil. This is the old dynasties. And this may be what had caused, there's many historians I've spoken to and listened to who said, no one can identify exactly what caused World War I. Well, they got rid of the old dynasties and the new banking systems came in. And of course, this was really when fiat currency was really beginning to come into play, you see. So where are we now? What is this 48 hours with Trump doing this? I know a lot of people love Trump. A lot of people hate Trump. I'm not here to get into politics. I don't want to hear about how much you hate him or how much you love him. But I think something much bigger here is happening that Trump is at the effect of here. And that is, I think we're seeing the world change. And remember, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that we just had in February was huge. And then these eclipses that follow. Isn't this interesting? They went in right on this last lunar eclipse within a day of it. So this is not just, we're taking out Iran. This is rearranging the entire financial structures. We may see a new quantum system about ready to happen. And, a lot of people have been saying, well, XRP might be on. Well, it just might be. And I got a little bit. I got to check on that. But anyhow, the point is that this is a turning point in the chapter of humanity. And remember, I said the Saturn-Neptune conjunction hadn't happened for 26,000 years approximately, give or take. I don't know the exact numbers. But in that very first Egyptian bound of tropical Aries. See, again, I mentioned last podcast how many people, they run around and say, I'm a Vedic astrologer, which is good. I love Vedic astrology. And I actually love Jyotisha better, which is the science of the soul, not just astrology. But don't omit the ancient, traditional, classical astrology. By the way, I want to mention Lee Lehman just passed away. And if anybody doesn't know who she is, I really like Lee. I used to buy software programs from her, solar maps and such. She was kind of a pioneer, along with Robert Hand and the Robert Schmidt, Robert Zolar, and Robert Schmidt. And what happened was she kind of spearheaded bringing back the Egyptian, the Greek, the Chaldean, and also the Sumerian systems in tropical astrology, which is today known as classical. She wrote a great book called The Essential Dignities, and she also wrote a great book called The Horary Art of Astrology, or the martial art of horary astrology. So, it kind of reintroduced William Lilly's work and so on and so forth, but not to dwell too long on her, but she contributed a lot, and I want to mention her because this all has something to do with the measurements of the astrology that has just happened on the world. We are kind of in a new chapter. And again, remember, I've been mentioning this repeatedly, and that is we are heading towards a conjunction of Alcyon. And I have to say, what's interesting about this is every time Uranus goes through the Pleiades. And it's not just Alcyon. You can see these are all the seven sisters known as the fixed stars in the Pleiades, which is a very narrow band. It's only a couple degrees wide. But every time Uranus goes through this, which is about every 84 to 86 years, we get massive change in the world. And this is another interesting point. The ancient references to Iran was the Aryan, you could say, where the Aryan race was supposed to have been. And there was an agreement. It was called the Skies-Picot Agreement that was signed in 1916 that basically was with the League of Nations. So we're seeing here something much, much bigger than Iran. Look at Cuba. Look at Canada, look at Venezuela, look at all these other places that we're seeing, Panama Canal just pushed back from China, and also Ecuador and other things that are going on, Greenland, so on and so forth. So something much bigger is happening here than just Iran. Not that it isn't big, but I can tell you this is a repositioning of the financial pyramids at the top of the stack, if you will. And the astrology shows it. And remember what I said, we just entered a Kala Sarpa yoga, which means all the planets are in between the moon's north and south nodes, except one, Pluto. And the moon will jump out every 2 weeks and run around it. Well, what does this mean? Every time these happen, we see dissension and change. But if you couple this with Uranus going over the seven sisters of the Pleiades, just to give you an idea, last time this happened, World War I. Time before that, Civil War. Time before that, Revolutionary War. Now, of course, I'm speaking from America here, but if you look at the history of the world in other areas, there was also major dissension during this time. Of course, everybody experienced it globally in World War II. Look at how the lines on the map, well, the lines on the map didn't change, but what did is the power structures changed. And they were reinforced a lot. So a lot of powerful stuff here that is going on right now. And I cast a chart because this was the big thing. Will the conflict end soon, or is this going to be some massive World War III coming in? Well, if I'm reading the interrogation right, it looks like it's probably going to be a really positive thing in the end. And again, we don't know exactly how this is all going to fall out. But I can tell you this, when I cast the chart, in fact, I'm going to go back and look at that. I won't put that on screen here, but I want to see that again so that I tell you correctly. When I looked at that chart, the specific question was the Iran-Middle East conflict. What's going to happen with it? Well, here's the good news. We just had the spring equinox, which was on Friday. Plus, we've got Mercury has just stationed and gone direct. Well, between now, and this is some good ways to look at life right now, this is a very productive time right now for everyone to get things done. I know I feel the energy myself. I was just talking this morning, I want to clean up and get stuff done. Of course, that's always known as spring cleaning, right? But between now and April 3rd, we have Mercury, which is stationed in the sky, now gone direct. See, that term comes from a train station. What that means in plain English is it's stationed and now trining Jupiter at a real slow speed as it speeds back up. If you ever watch a train, it comes to a stop, right? And real slowly it starts building back up the speed. Well, that's exactly how these planets appear from Earth's perspective, because we're looking at geocentric astrology. And I don't care if you look at it sidereal or tropical, it's going to be the same thing in terms of speed. And this is an exceedingly powerful one. And this relates to when does the Middle East conflict kind of resolve? Because I think this is much more than just Iran. You're also seeing the London bankers, the Davos, and also the bankers in Switzerland. This is musical chairs here. Things are in the air here. We've definitely got some music playing. And when the music stops, which is when this Middle East conflict finally settles, we're going to see, I think, a rearrangement in the financial systems. And I also think we're going to see a lot of different shifts in the currency markets that may or may not be on the mind control news. This is huge. This is really a big deal. And what's interesting about this is when I looked at this interrogation, what I just told you is Mercury is stationing and it's making an excellent received trine. Now, to credit Lee Lehman, she brought out what some of the ancient astrologers used to talk about. It's called reception. Reception is when a planet's in another planet's sign. What does that mean? Well, that's like if you go over to a friend's house and you know them really well, you can yank open the door of the refrigerator and say, hey, you got anything in here I can have, like a cool drink or something, right? Whereas if you were at a person's house you didn't know, you wouldn't be doing that, though some people might. But you see what I'm saying? Reception gives connectivity, and it also gives a way that things can happen that are much more open. So this is going on between now and April 3rd. And even though, we're going to hear the news tell us how horrible everything is and a few missiles going off here and there, I really think that they're going to get the strait open based on what I see here. And I think you're going to see the oil start to flow. And it's going to take a little bit of time. But I got originally on an interrogation within about 3 weeks or so, give or take, timing's hard to get, things would really start to clean up. And there's been a massive amount of military action over there, probably a lot more than we're even seeing on the news. And I always find this funny how certain news stations are able to get underground and see all these drones and storage places, particularly like CNN and such. But very interesting to me how they got access to that. Maybe they had it from old files. I don't know, to their credit. But very interesting stuff. So this looks like, if I'm reading all this right, there's going to be a little more trouble, but ultimately this is going to pan out, and it's going to do more than pan out. It's going to, I think, change the world in new directions that are going to be profound. Now, granted, we got AI, and that's a scary thing. I was just listening this morning on the news on how all these drone companies in the United States are integrating AI, and my mind races back to Terminator. I always remember Terminator 2, especially when, remember, Skynet was going to come online, and then all of a sudden Skynet took over, right? And all these unmanned machines were acting like intelligent robots, and of course Terminator was one of them, and these flying machines. And it kind of reminds me of, I think Terminator was set in 2040 or something like that. I can't remember the year. Maybe somebody knows. But I believe that's when it was, set at in Terminator 2. And we're not too far away. We're 14 years away. And we are seeing so much technology advance. And I don't know that anything can stop this. This is an evolution the human race is just on. And we're going to have to see where it goes. But I can tell you, drones are being they're talking about how every police station is going to have drones. We're going to see them everywhere. Like anything goes wrong, a drone will show up and start taking pictures of everything that's going on before the cops even get there, because they're coming by land and they got to go through, all the traffic and everything else. So we're heading into Minority Report. We're heading into Terminator. It's looking like a futuristic world. I've been saying that ever since 220. It's going to get like the Jetsons. And, 220 forward is only 6 years ago. And look at where we're at. And you're going to see an escalation of technology, all this stuff going on. I just heard the United States came up with these super micro nuclear reactors. Well, this is where your flying cars are going to come from eventually. And again, I've been talking about how Skunk Works is reported to have come up with fission, not fusion, or plasma, if you will, technologies that are absolutely incredible. Low, small level nuclear craft or plasma, etc., whatever you want to call it, that is going to create incredible amounts of power. And this is why you're seeing lasers, directed energy weapons in space, on crafts, in ships, etc. We are there. And this is all dovetailing into the world's changing. And it's been on that change ever since 220 forward. And I really have to say, we have a new one world order clashing, going like this, with nationalism. And we're seeing that right now. And I think right now, nationalism, Iran is metaphoric, not that it's not happening, but I think it is also a destruction of the old power banking systems that have been in place for a long, long time, because there's a lot of secrets that I've heard that are going on and through Iran and Ukraine as well that they're not telling us. There's a lot of stuff going on here that is much more secret that nobody's talking about. And if the news doesn't have it on their teleprompters, they're not going to report it. But I can tell you there's some deep stuff going on from everything I have heard. And the chart, the interrogation looks good. So, yeah, a lot of people are commenting that this war is about a takedown of the London banking system, right? Who's been using Iran for years. That's exactly right. And that's exactly what I've been hearing. And you know what? The chart shows the same thing. So, yeah, a lot of stuff here. So, there's all kinds of things happening. This is really, in some ways, a very exciting time to be alive, even though I know they're spraying the sky, spraying the food and everything else. But I think conscious awareness is also expanding a lot. And I have to say, yeah, people are talking now about the high prices of gas is back above 350. You bet. But I think it's going to drop down as soon as they get the Strait open. Apparently, close to 22 countries have agreed to come in and enforce the Strait of Hormuz, which is huge. It's really, really huge. And I think, there's a lot of panic. There's a lot of disinformation. But I think ultimately, when this is all done, if I'm reading this chart right, it looks a lot more positive than we think. And even though, and again, we're hearing, these athletes getting hung, but they get press because they were famous athletes and they should get press. But I'm also hearing there's innocent people who just walk around with their skin showing. Women, there was a couple of news clips I watched where, somebody walking around violating a law of this religion, they're hung. They're literally put in, tortured, and hung, or whatever, beheaded. So it's a pretty intense situation over there. And this is interesting because the bankers have always seemed to like this. If you look back, I always talk about the Bank of International Settlements. They favored Germany. They actually brought Germany up. Well, look what Germany's done in 2 world wars. It was right at the beginning of them, at the heart of it. They're not at the heart of this one. This is not a war. This is an ending, I think, of an empire that's been in control of the world for the better part of, a long, long time. But at least we could say visually through the banking systems for the last 100+ years, probably since the mid 1800s, actually. So this is really, really quite an interesting historical turn of events as this goes. And I actually have a positive outlook to this. Again, I said this Kala Sarpa Yoga, which is all the planets in between the moon's nodes here. I'll put that back up because it's kind of cool to see the visual on this. Just so, if anybody's listening and says, what the heck's he talking about? Kala Sarpa, what? These are strange terms. Kala means time. Sarpa means serpent, or you could say the entwinement. There's many meanings to it. And again, you can see here, by the way, this is Iran's chart. I just happen to have up right here. And you know what I did? I went back to right about the time they were going in and that eclipse happened. Of course, March 3rd, we had that lunar eclipse, which was exceedingly powerful. Well, notice where that happened. That eclipse was actually, well, we're on real time right now, but oh no, that's right. This is correct. This is you can see this is March 3rd. A little hard to see here if you're on a small screen, but you can always zoom in. That eclipse, which was the full moon eclipse on the 3rd, actually happened right over Iran's Saturn. And more interesting, it was over its 10th house, which is the government, you could say, those in power. And with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction happened right over Iran's Mars, Mercury, and the Sun. And again, it's interesting how this is ancient Persia, and it just may get restored because this regime seemed to have we know it took in the 70s is when they really took over. And of course, here's the date right here. Iran was formed in its current government, April 1st, 1979, at about 1 minute after midnight, Tehran, Iran time. And, I know a lot of clients who are from Iran, who've got relatives, friends. I've actually done readings in the past where people had just left Iran, and they were talking about how suppressive it was. I mean, literally, The torture is pretty unthinkable. It's like worse than medieval in some ways. It's really, really horrible what's been done to these poor people. And you either conform or you die. And this is really an unprecedented time in history where you're seeing this being taken out. And I can tell you, I don't think it's going to last much longer from everything I see. And that'll be good because you'll see fuel prices drop back down. And again, you can see the politics in this. Ken, if I go back to that diagram I was just showing a minute ago, I mean, you don't need a brick to fall on your head to know, hey, if the United States is producing the most amount of oil. There was another graph I put up last podcast. I want to put this up again. This one here shows basically North America is producing, not by far, but quite a bit of the world's production, like 29.9%, where the Middle East in its totality is producing about 29.1%. So we don't need to import oil. And yet our fuel prices are going through the roof, and especially here in California. And I can tell you, of course, half of what I hear in California is taxes. And Newsom has chased every single oil company out of California, with the Green New Deal. It's just shoved them out of here. So whether we like oil, we hate oil, we are going to have oil. And I can tell you, I can tell you the power in diesels and in gasoline engines, they're going to be around for a while. There's no question. Even I think when we start getting into very hybrid advanced technologies, which are there, and I don't know if I'd call them free energy, but there is free energy out there. They've been suppressing it a long time. I know hydrogen is a very viable source of power. I've actually experienced it myself. And they've been suppressing all of this. But you're not dealing here with just oil. You're dealing with the economic structures of society. And if I think we just swiped oil off the market and replaced it with free energy, we'd need a new system. And who knows, maybe that is coming. But, and I think it will eventually. But this is a really, really powerful time of change. And that's what I wanted to emphasize. And, we've got a Sun-Saturn conjunction going on between now and March 25th, which is just a couple of days, right? And after Tuesday, you're going to feel the brakes really come off. See, every year the Sun and Saturn conjoin. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's always a suppressive time of heavy responsibility and decisions. But it's also after that, it now goes into the rest of its what we call epicycles. And very, very powerful. And again, I really like what's going on in the latter part of this month into April 3rd, as we have this slow sustaining and speeding up, trying to exalted Jupiter in the tropical systems. And it's very powerful as well in the sidereal. And of course, Jupiter will enter sidereal Cancer in this June, right at the end of May. So this shows things are moving forward. I don't get it's going to be World War III. And I hope I'm right on that, because Uranus definitely can stir things up like that. This is a different kind of war. I think this PSYOPs war has been going on for a long time, ever since 2020. That's my opinion. That, again, was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction when COVID came out. And of course, I had one client who apparently has electron microscopes and all this fancy stuff. They're actually seeing nanoparticles in the chemtrails. So, they don't need to vax you. So interesting stuff. So all that we can do to improve our health and keep clean is a really, really good thing. And again, I always talk about reflexology and, eating good and staying away from all this GMO crap is a good idea to do. But I think we live in spite of it. My grandmother used to say that. So someone's saying here, the petrodollar depends on the USC of 710, the World Economic Outlook. That's the threat. We always hear about the other countries want to get rid of the US. Yeah, you bet. This is, someone else is saying here, it's a PSYOPs ever since 1913. You bet. I think it's been going on right after the carpetbaggers came in World War II. I'm sorry, in Civil War, not World War II. And but Wilson, I always find that was interesting, a little Biden parallels here, where the wife of Woodrow Wilson was said to be a huge influence on what had gone on with him. And of course, he had a stroke. And there's a lot of conspiracy theories around that. I'll leave that one alone. But one thing's for sure, he sure did rubber stamp that Federal Reserve Act, which isn't any more federal than Federal Express. And I would think the structure of it is okay. What I'm hearing is they want to actually get what killed JFK and probably Lincoln as well, and that is the ability for the United States to print its own money. Again, we just hit $39 trillion in debt. And, many financial experts will tell you, well, it doesn't mean anything, right? Because it's all just numbers. Well, they're right. It is, but it's some big numbers. And we have never had this kind of debt before. If this country does not get up on its feet and reorganize the system, we're in other words, if the bankers could call the collateral, we'd be in big, big trouble. So this is a lot more going on than I think anyone is 100% aware of, me included. But I can tell you the astrology shows it. And I see the undercurrents here going on. And this Middle East is huge. It's absolutely huge. So yeah, one person saying that, someone said, yeah, Wilson's the guy who installed the Fed. You bet. Oh, absolutely, he did. And it's been going on a long, long time. So a lot of great comments here that I want to address. And clearly, someone says, I feel like secrets are being revealed all around me. Yeah, good versus evil. And that's really what it comes down to. This whole thing with Iran, ancient Persia, goes back thousands of years. The dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, which was centuries old, all collapsed during this whole area of World War I. It was an interesting time. And the world really changed. And this is, of course, when we saw the powerhouses come in, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and influenced the entire industrial and educational basis. It was huge, absolutely huge. And it shows to the astrology. By the way, that was another Saturn-Pluto conjunction, was real close to that, like real close. And what broke out right after the old rubber stamp of the Federal Reserve Act? World War I. My grandfather was actually drafted into that, but he ended up not getting deployed. He got his gas mask, got his training, got his pointed helmet and all that stuff ready to go. And then the war settled in November of 1918. So it's pretty interesting stuff here, what happened. So I think it was 1918, something like that, or whenever it was. But I know clearly, it was 1918. And, this is, we're witnessing history here. In many ways. And I think you're going to see the Middle East really shift. And I also think we're going to see the financial systems. Notice how Scott Bessent is constantly being trotted out into these newscasts talking. The Treasury Secretary. This is about money. This is a big deal about money. And I think a lot of the old cigar smoking, brandy smoking boys who set this all up are going to roll over in their graves as to what happens here in the very short future, and is already happening. So this is really, really powerful. And again, this is the old, what they call Aryan Empire. They said it was called, they actually called Persia, which is Iran, the land of the Aryans for centuries. How about that one? That's interesting. Anybody remember Hitler, the Aryan race? So interesting how these threads of bloodlines keep showing up in all of this stuff that happens in the major events throughout history. Really interesting stuff. So, a lot of great comments here. Someone says, hopefully we can pull up from this debt. Yeah, the only way I see out of this debt is to get the wheels going. It used to take 20-something years to get a mining permit. Now you can get a mining permit in 20 days. And pretty interesting stuff in terms of all this environmental stuff. So it's the only way out. They have capped off all the resources of this country since the little after the I think it was the mid 1800s, right after the Civil War. They just capped it off. Made it so difficult to access all this. And I find it so interesting too on the agricultural areas, where even the United States is huge in agriculture. It's second only to China. China actually was the number one agricultural producer. And of course, it's different what type of agriculture they produce. Let me see if I can find that clip here. I'll put it up here. It's actually an image. And it's another graph that I thought was really quite interesting because let me see if I can find that thing here. Yeah, this is it. This is the places. Well, it's not letting me do it. I got to eliminate something here on my screen. But anyhow, I'll just tell you that the United States is second, but the diversity of agriculture is quite wide. And again, I've been hearing a lot of things about organic. Organic is so important because they say they spray a lot of these crops with glycol, and there's all kinds of health problems with this stuff. So eating something organic is really good for the body. And again, when you grow it in the ground, sometimes you might be better off growing your own stuff, or getting organic because you can definitely taste the difference too. This glycol is supposed to really cause a lot of trouble. And how many people that we see in their 60s, 70s, and 80s are all running to the doctors, getting packed full of pharmaceuticals. And, this is a time when we got to start to really keep our health. Even the young people, I mean, you can see it. People obese and, not healthy and sick, in their 20s and 30s, even in their teens. So I know I had a lot of health issues as a young guy, and after I got perforated with vaccinations in the 60s. And I can tell you, I had a lot of compromised health stuff with, chronic fatigue, etc. So, and many people have this at a young age. And it's really important what we eat. And again, I love reflexology, keeping ourselves opened up. So, someone's also quoting the $39 trillion. Yeah. Talk about we being in trouble. We're lucky because the whole system is being doled out in the petrodollar. And that's another thing that's happening too, is we're seeing the BRICS nations here really be thwarted. I mean, China, it's got plenty of reserve oil right now, and it can get oil from Russia. And trust me, they can get oil out of Saudi Arabia pretty doggone easy with the pipelines without the Strait of Hormuz. This is much more political, in my opinion, than just that. I mean, the United States, it probably depends on so little oil coming out of there. And yet, when we go back to politics, look at what we've heard year after year after year. Saudi Arabia, this, Saudi Arabia, that. It's so interesting. And the Strait of Hormuz and the Middle Eastern oil. This is the power corridors that the bankers have held for at least the last 100 years. And again, if you look into what really that was all about with the British Empire and all that, doing what they did in World War I, it becomes pretty transparent. And that is changing right now in no small way. And so someone would love to see a chart on the possibility of going on the gold standard. That could happen. I hear the United States has a tremendous amount of gold. There is a story that I heard a long time ago about there was this huge cache of gold found in the Colorado River basin in these caves that were like Tartaria. They were actually carved out by lasers. And I thought, okay, is that true? Do you know the steamships are still sitting there that hauled the gold out of there? And pretty interesting stuff. This is all in the first part of last century. In the late 1800s, early teens, I forget the exact date, someone might know it. But apparently it was just absolute fortunes in gold taken out. There's still fortunes in gold sitting in Nevada. The whole, Mother Lode that was sitting there that was being, mined during the Civil War, it's all still up there. They capped it all off. There's tremendous amounts of resources in North America. It's stunning, absolutely stunning how much resources there are here. And of course, look at Alaska. So yeah, I would tell you that is a distinct possibility. And we'll look into that more later. But I think we're in the era right now of massive, massive changes. And I think it's going to go on until this summer. And, we've got a lot of other things coming up. We have a really big position in the sky known as the first Saturn-Pluto square. That's going to happen in 2028. Remember, we had the conjunction in 2000. So, see, Saturn and Pluto go around and they conjunct, square, and oppose each other as they go around this approximate 38-year to 48-year cycle. It's not exact because of the elliptical orbits, especially of Pluto. So when Saturn and Pluto make hard aspects, the world goes through changes. Nixon took us off the gold standard on one of those. Again, World War I happened on one of those. COVID happened on the conjunction. 9/11 happened on the opposition. The banks crashed. The housing market went in the sewer in 2008. So belief is not required. If you look at these outer planets, when they align, you say the lower world of humanity definitely changes. So it's really, really interesting stuff. So someone's saying here, all kinds of stuff about power. Yeah, a lot of stuff here. So a lot of great comments here. You can print endless cryptocurrency, entirely different structure of the finance. You bet. Yeah, this is really hands on the bat, and it's going to be interesting to see where this all shakes out. One thing's for sure, I agree with Alan Greenspan. He said this a long time ago, about 40 years ago. He said the system is so big, it can't fail because you have all these people buying things. When you really think of a country, it's a gigantic corporation. It's actually a gigantic trust. That's what the founding forefathers had said about, nations. And that, a nation that prints its own currency, a nation that generates its own wealth, has people working, contributing, and you have a society. When we go to the grocery store and we buy something from someone else who made it, and then, of course, we're working and making what we make, this generates an immense inertia of power in a societal structure. And what's interesting is the bankers sit back here and dole out the currencies, if you will, of commerce, of what we trade upon. So it has an intrinsic value just by virtue of the fact that we give it value and are willing to exchange and receive. And this up and down floating crap game of its value and all the inflation is really an interesting study. And of course, this goes back to gold and silver and the precious metals. You couldn't alter that, though you could put a value on what it was worth. You see, so you can do the same thing with gold and silver. It's a very interesting thing, the study of economics. But what's interesting is how astrology dovetails with when these changes happen. And we're clearly at the point of change here. And again, someone's mentioning here the price of silver has been crazy. Yeah, it has. And also gold too. I mean, it just keeps on going up, which reminds me, I've been talking a lot about some of the things that I do, with the gemstones. And, it's a lot of fun here. You can see these are different designs of rings that I do where it actually touches the skin. And, all different types of pendants here can be done. I actually use natural untreated gemstones. That's one of the keys of this. One of the coolest things here is you can actually see these are the 4 archangels at the top of that gem, and then the person's guardian angel underneath. I had shown a while back here this incredible pendant I had just completed. This is one of the most amazing pendants I've ever worked on. And this is Archangel Michael, Archangel Raphael, which is air. Archangel Michael's fire. This is air. This is, of course, the water, which is Vav. And the last hay is the earth spirits. And this actually shows divinity in descending order. And, I often put this, I'll show you a couple of really cool things that I kind of wanted to demonstrate here today, which is really a cool thing with us and all this negativity of the world to kind of step out of the craziness of the world. And I'll show you something here that's really, really cool. And I had mentioned those are the 4 archangels. Well, here's something that's really cool. You can actually see this is an analogy, your head. This is where fire is. Well, what is fire? Fire is thought. It's spiritual. It's the divine energy. This is like your shoulders and your arms, which is the air, which is action, where we can actually take that and make it. This is the Vav, which is water, which is, of course, the torso. And this is your hips and your legs, which touch the earth and the physical world. So this was actually a method of spiritual protection where you would imagine fire up in your head, or Archangel Michael, and then you would imagine Archangel Raphael in the shoulder, giving you the ability to concretize thought and spirit. This is the core strength of the body, which is the water. And of course, the lowest archangel, Uriel, is where we hit the ground. See, the human figure is very divine. And this was actually thought to really strengthen. And you can envision this even when you walk or just lying in bed. It's a very powerful envision. In fact, you can even take this much further. You can actually look at this to, I always bring up this diagram, which, whatever your faith or belief in is divinity, God or creation is certainly above creation. Well, this up here, let me use a permanent pen. This up here is the fire. It's the yod. It is where literally spirit concretizes and is the divine energy of spirit. This here is where it solidifies even more, where it's air. This one down here is, of course, the water, which is the waters of creation. That's talked about a lot in biblical texts and in many spiritual texts. And the final place is the hay, which is the astral planes, and you could say the physical earth. And it's not just this one. There's a lot of them. So in other words, there's other planets besides this one where that physical realm of creation is believed to happen. So this is really kind of a cool analogy just to bring up, because many of the old texts would talk about visualizations that were quite powerful. And again, I always talk about how literally this might be the soul cauldron or soul trap, where we get trapped into reincarnation. And I talk about a lot of texts. One of them in particular was the Share Hagilgam. That's the text that actually talks about how your lower conscious mind is the interface to this lower world. And it's interesting because when you look at the world changing, that's the physical world. That's the societal external worlds. But inside, we're just spiritual beings having a physical experience. And I wouldn't say just either. I'd say we are that, which is quite profound. And, there's a lot of ways at looking at this stuff. The human aura is, again, a magical, literally a divine magical flow of energies. And science and medicine has yet to figure it out. Genetics doesn't figure it out. Genetics is amazing, no question about it, but it doesn't explain how this etheric energy can bring in consciousness and thought. There's not a scientist drawing breaths that could tell us how consciousness gets into the gray matter of the brain. Again, I'm talking, actually, Terry Garr's sister, Lisa Garr, is going to be with me on, or I'm going to be with her, I should say, on Coast to Coast on the 29th. It's going to be late at night. It's going to be, I think it's from midnight to 2 a.m. in the morning. And we're going to be talking a lot about ghosts and about NDEs, out-of-body experiences, OBEs, and clearing places and attachments to the aura and many of these really cool things. So if you can, check it out. If you can't, check it out at another time. But there's so many cool ways to look at this. And I think it's very conscious expanding, because remember, I always use this diagram. We are under, you could say, a spell of materialism. And what's really interesting is how real that is. I mean, all of us are so attached to our bodies, our money, our world, our environments, and we've created a reality structure that we all are in. Notice up above this big, thick dashed line, that's not just the subconscious mind, that's actually the upper layers of the soul. And the lower conscious mind is really the steering wheel, the gas pedal, and the brakes. You could divide this lower portion underneath this big, thick dashed line into the so-called rational, spiritual portions of our mind, or our logic and our reason. And then this one way, way, way down here is our emotional perception of reality. Notice there's another line here. This line is the you could say the emotional portions that astrologers refer to as the moon. This is why if you get around Nadi and Kala Chakra and Vedic astrology techniques, you'll find the moon is a central point of focus, and it should be, because the moon is our emotional perception of reality. We take logic and reason, and we emotionalize it. This is why we spend the rest of our lives, and quite possibly many lifetimes, unraveling all the emotional impressions, both positive and negative, that are impressed upon the lower vessel known as the nefesh. It's actually little trees of life, just like this big one here that I had up a minute ago. See, you could actually draw little trees of life in each one of these. These little things, you can see the planets are in these circles. And these are called sephirots. They're actually spiritual containment vessels. Now, many people say, oh, this is the Kabbalah. Well, definitely the Kabbalah uses this stuff, but it's ancient spiritual wisdom and knowledge that seems to show up all over the place. Definitely in the ancient Kabbalistic and rabbinical texts, but also in Egypt, in many other places, the medieval texts, it's all over the place. So very, very interesting stuff. How we are so reactive to everything that happens. But if we step outside of ourselves, we realize that, hey, the world is doing what the world's going to do. But we're just the experiencer. It's a big movie. Shakespeare was right. The world is a stage. We're the actors. And the movie we're playing is the time-space continuum we're in right now. And that's where astrology is really interesting, because it seems to be the portals that divine energy comes down and interacts with each individual soul in its completely and unique way. It's not the same for anybody. I mean, I see it in my own life. I see it in so many people. Nobody is going to have, the same reaction to transits and progressions and dashas the same way, because everyone is completely unique. We're like fine-tuned tuning forks, very complex ones. So it's really, really cool stuff. And now when you get into politics and governments and religions and all this stuff, you feel like a Q-tip in a mud puddle, don't you? So at least I do. And God bless them all, or something like that. But the bottom line is future forecasters say we will be put on a crypto basis. Yeah, we're definitely coming into a new financial system. It's going to be interesting. We hear this quantum financial system where, again, this has been a lot. I've heard a lot of this being thrown around for a long, long time. And that is, they may use drawing rights and all these different valuations, even gold. I mean, think about it. If you were living in the 1400s and somebody said, well, how much you want for that horse over there? They might take, X amount of gold for it. And that could change 200 years later, but you're still going to pay some quantity of some, financial instrument to purchase what you purchase. People want something for their sweat and for their time and their knowledge. So it's all a game of valuation. So very interesting stuff. But it's interesting how these top bloodlines always seem to be at the top of the pyramid, controlling the money. I think Rothschild said it best. He says, you give me control of the money and I care not who makes the laws. And something very unique is happening right now. I mean, we're seeing this entire propaganda machine globally, but particularly here in the United States. You don't have to look too far. Just turn on your TV, right? And you see it's mind control. And when you look past that, and this is what's really, again, unusual, is the internet. Now, there's a lot of people who are crazy on the internet. I might be one of them, but I kind of like being crazy. But the bottom line is, we're all getting information from multiple sources that allow us to evaluate more than just being told what to believe, right? So it is an interesting time of conscious expansion. And I actually think that's wonderful. Even though some things are crazy, a lot of it's good. There's a lot of great stuff out there that is coming through that is really, I think, expanding consciousness. And that's what this Saturn Neptune is all about. It's dissolving the old realities. Think about that. The old realities, the old structures, the banking structures and conscious structures. This Saturn Neptune conjunction. And what's it doing? Bringing in an expanded awareness and new structures. The old ones got to fall for the new ones get built. And, if you look through history, everything's been built on the rubble of the past, one way or another. So it's pretty well stuff. Just take a look, listen to Jason on Archaics and other channels, Tartarian channels, some great stuff out there about the real histories that we have been totally lied to about and has been skewed. It's a very interesting little world here. So anyways, yeah, a lot of people talking about bloodlines here. Again, I met David Icke, and a lot of people think David Icke's crazy. I don't. I think a lot of what David's come up with is actually pretty damn accurate. And, he gets ridiculed for all reptilian shape-shifting. We're actually going to be talking about that on the Coast to Coast show with Lisa Gar, and pretty wild stuff, because I've seen stuff, and I believe we are living in a reality structure that is really expanding right now. I mean, some of the stuff that I've seen in my own lifetime with my own eyes, I'll be telling a lot of those stories on that show, is profound. And many people have told me stories that it's stuff that you wouldn't believe. I mean, it's just wild. I had a client just the other day tell me how they remember a past life on Mars. Now, we might think of it as, a linear system, but there's multiple dimensions here. And this is very deep, deep stuff, and then some people listening might go, well, that sounds crazy, right? But, we're our lower conscious minds are really concretized. They actually, many psychiatrists say the conscious mind is an attenuator. It's actually been dumbed down in order to exist into this reality structure. And I think that's what really Dr. Carl Wicklund and so many other great practitioners, 30 Years Among the Dead, many of the books I talk about. And, one book I always love to mention is this one. It's called Esoteric Practices, written by the Magus of Strovolos. And this book is an incredible book. Why? Because what it does is it gives you exercises, meditations, ways of projecting lights, healing, amazing stuff. And one of the metaphors he uses in there that I absolutely love is talking about a flame. Look at a flame. It's very blue at the bottom where it consumes the wick of matter. You can take negativity, anger, or frustration and push it metaphorically through the base of the flame up into divine light. And it does two things. One is it actually has an effect on dissipating karmic elementals that we've all created by what we believe and what we think, right? It's very interesting. And more than that, it takes your mind off the infinite spin cycle loop that we're all on. Don't we all remember thinking things, we get angry at somebody or somebody does something, or we have these memories and past things, that it's a continuous loop. Dascalos actually talked about that, the Magus of Strovolos. These elementals emit out of the third eye chakra, and they go out into our auric field, and they enter the base of the spine. And you can actually see that if you train yourself to focus not on your eyes, but on your astral sight, which we all have. Again, I refer you to that podcast that we did a while back with Laura Hirsch and her son, Trevor. So amazing. He's talking to disincarnate souls known as relatives who have deceased, bringing messages back. He's talking to animals, hearing how certain animals had died. They had checked it out and it happened. And this is becoming a common theme in telepathy with many of these autistic children now beginning to communicate through spelling to speech. It is a way that they simply communicate to their parents and other people. So again, we learned how to use this and these and the five senses, but that's just the interface to the lower dense physical world. And when we check out, which we all will sooner or later, I call it taking the pipe, right? When we exit this physical world known as death, we are absolutely going to contend with another dimensional reality that we need to be more aware of, because that's an inevitability. That's one thing we can predict with 100% accuracy. We will all have a beginning, a middle, a growth, and an atrophication and death. Everybody goes through that. Look at Chuck Norris. Here's the guy, working out every day, running around selling supplements, and we all will check out. That's an inevitability, but it's only in the physical, not the consciousness. Read texts like the Sharia Gilgum, the Magus of Strovolos, and so many others. Dr. Wicklund's book is so amazing. It really hits us over the head with, wait a minute, nobody dies. And we're so unprepared for that in so many ways. Then, look at what happens. So you never know when the old angel's going to come knocking on the door. It can happen anytime. So interesting stuff. So a lot of great comments here. I've got to run because I have to go do some things here today that are very important. But yeah, a lot of people here are talking about cryptos. We just may see that take off here. And there's a lot of good guys on cryptos out there. I stay away from recommending things because I only look at interrogations. And cryptos have been really squirrely. I really think gold and silver are going to continue to be exceedingly valuable. I think, again, not a bad place to put your money, and really looks good. So, yep, a lot of great comments here. Look at here. So yeah, yeah, glyphosate. Someone's talking about glyphosate. I think it's glycol. Um, don't quote me, but I think it's glycol that is used. Someone's mentioning glyphosate. I know there's different terms that are used in supplements and so on and so forth. So you got to really be careful because you change a couple of letters and you're going to have a different compound or substance. So, but yeah, I think it's glycol is what I heard, that they're spraying crops to keep them lasting longer. They stay, they're waxing them and irradiating them. They're doing all kinds of stuff. So, that's how they get there. So, anyways, someone says, when do you see the gold standard coming back to a paper currencies? I don't know. I don't know. I have to look into that. I could certainly cast a chart, but we'll be here in another 20 minutes and I can't be. But I really think, it'd be good to look at a gold interrogation. I've had a lot of clients ask me about it. I think it's going to keep going. Again, we're dealing here with a changing world. And I think gold is a very safe place to be. And so is silver, because, and platinum as well, all these precious metals. I tell a lot of people who are buying gems from me, hey, you're investing into gold, even though you don't want to, take it out of your gem. But it's a good place to put money right now. Always has been. Always has been. So, yeah, the Grand Canyon has a huge stash of gold. You bet. And they took a lot out of there. There is so many secrets to this world that we don't get told. But, yeah, you bet. There's a lot of interesting stuff here going on. Yeah, there's a lot of great comments here. I'm just reading some of them here before I jump off. When the sun goes in Leo, gold usually goes up. Yeah, that is a true thing. The sun is ruled by gold. And right now, you might see a little slight dip because the sun's conjuncting Saturn. A couple of days, it'll be over with. I often find when Jupiter makes aspects to the sun or Saturn in positive ways, the trines or sextiles, it usually has an effect on gold. No question about it. Interrogation is your best bet. It really does a lot of stuff here. So in terms of indicating things. So someone saying there's no gold in Fort Knox. Well, one thing's for sure, they sure ain't telling us what is or isn't there, are they? So yeah, I heard that there was supposedly just an audit done there. And so yeah, who knows what the story is on that one there. So anyways, yeah, so many great comments here. When is the OBE NDE phase show, please? Oh, that's going to be on March 29th at midnight. So I believe it's Sunday night from midnight to 2 a.m. on Coast to Coast. So it'll be live. But I know you can go back and listen to it too. It'll be with Lisa Garr, who was Terry Garr's sister, who passed away, the actress. Very good actress. But anyways, yeah, David Icke was right all this time. Yeah, you bet. So, yeah. Yeah, someone's saying here they think it's glyphosate. You could be right. I heard it was glycol, but whatever it is, it's not good for you. I know that. The stuff that they're using to preserve things with. So, all right. So I get wait this one out. The astrology says, even though it's going to be a little rocky for a minute, it's going to all pan out. I think there is so many secret weapons right now that are in play. And you notice China is being pretty quiet at this juncture. And I don't think they're going to step in and try and stop the United States from doing what they're doing. Not a chance, not from what I see. So, and that's a good thing. Let's hope they don't, because we do not need that. So anyways, all right, you all have a great weekend. And I hope, this is some good insight and direction for some people here. At least I know a lot of people have been asking me, geez, Jeff, when do you think this is going to end? When's it going to happen? I do think we're going to see special ops going into Iran, whether we even hear about it or not. They're going to go in there and they're going to find some of the stuff that's been buried so deep in these places that they can't get to it, nuclear enrichment, and also the bomb building materials, etc. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting journey here. But I could tell you one thing. This kind of reminds me of when Germany got the hell bombed out of it. And very interesting stuff. And, you look at sometimes these regimes, they won't quit. They just won't quit. So it's a shame to have to do this, but there may not be no other way to do this. And again, this is much bigger than just Iran, as I had said. So, all right, everyone, you have a great rest of your weekend, and I will talk to you probably next Wednesday. So, thanks so much for listening.